Welcome to the show. Here's my dad.
On this episode of the Infant Adoption Guide podcast, we welcome Nicole Witt back to the show as we talk about how infant adoption has changed, along with tips for hopeful adoptive parents. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Infant Adoption Guide podcast. My name's Tim Elder. I am a dad of 3 through infant adoption, and this is the show all about domestic infant adoption. So if you're a faithful listener, maybe this is your first time listening, I welcome you and thank you for joining me again as we enter episode number 53, and our guest is Nicole Witt, the executive director of the Adoption Consultancy, and she's been helping build families through adoption for many years. She's a frequent speaker on adoption, and she's also a professional member of Resolve, the National Infertility Association. She's also recognized as an adoption information source from all over the country. She's actually even been an expert witness in a court case where she had to come in and explain about adoption. So she's also been interviewed by all sorts of media, including Fox News, World News Tonight, CBS News, many other outlets, including on this show back on episode number 17. So her site is theadoptionconsultancy.com. If you don't need to worry about writing that down, we'll have that in the show notes for you at infantadoptionguide.com/53. So as we start here in 2018, I think it's a great idea for us to take a look back really on how infant adoption has changed over the years, how different it is now than just a few years ago. And for example, the internet's playing a huge part in the adoption process, and it continues to evolve and it continues to change how we as hopeful adoptive parents enter the process and get through the process, but also the expectant parents, expectant mom. So I'm so glad to have Nicole back on the show because she is so involved as an adoption consultant on many different aspects of adoption. She deals with it every day. So that's what we're going to do on the show. We want to give you the tips and resources that will help you manage all these changes. So let's get into the interview right now with Nicole Witt. Okay, welcome Nicole. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, yes. Great to have you back. It's been 36 episodes since you were last on the podcast. Way back in episode number 17. Yeah, way back in episode number 17, you came on and we're talking about adoption consultants and what you do. So that was great to have you back on the show. I know you always bring great information and great stories to share with us. So it's great to have you back. And this topic is great too, because we're talking about the change going on in the adoption world. And we know it's changing, and it has changed over the years, and we as hopeful adoptive parents really want to and need to keep up with these changes as we look to build our families. We need to stay on top of things really to help us adopt faster and easier, and hopefully with less risk and less money even. So that's what we're all about today. Yeah. That's what we're going to discuss, and I'm ready to jump into the questions. And my first one is, you being an adoption consultant, I know you see a lot of different angles of the adoption world, working with agencies and attorneys and with birth parents and hopefully adoptive families. So how do you think infant adoption has changed over the past several years?
Well, I've been doing this for coming up on 15 years now, and I think probably more things have changed than haven't. Right? Yeah. I think some of the basic underlying principles are the same, but so many of kind of the details and how things are approached have changed. But I think some of the big ones are, and I think we'll delve more into each of these, but I think some of the big ones are that there are fewer adoptions happening these days than there used to be. Unfortunately, there is a higher rate of adoption matches not going through until placement. And then, of course, there's the implications of technological changes, both on the adoption process itself and on families, post-adoption.
Right. Yeah, man, we need to break down each one of those because each one of those are big.
Right.
I'd like you to discuss really what fall-through rates mean, just in case somebody listening to this might go, what does that mean? How would you explain fall-through rates?
Yeah, so the way that I look at that is that's from when people have been matched, so hopeful adoptive parents have been matched with an expectant mom, and then for some reason or another, that doesn't result in that baby being placed with the adoptive parents.
Yeah, through whatever reason. And I know there's a ton of different reasons that could happen, but the biggest one probably is just the birth mom changing her mind, which happens.
Yes, and that is the biggest one, and those truly are honest changes of heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when that happens, often nobody's more surprised than the birth mom herself, right? So sometimes if she doesn't see it coming, it's pretty hard for anybody else to see it coming. But I think one of the reasons that is a little bit on the rise is that, and again, it ties into the point about technology. It's so much easier for her to get a lot of information online about how the process works and what her rights are and so on. And I think from that perspective, that's a very positive thing, because I don't think anybody wants an expectant mom going through with an adoption because she wasn't informed about her options.
Absolutely.
Right? So that aspect of it is positive. I think the downside is that for those few bad apples out there who kind of tend to give more people a bad name, who truly are looking to work the system or scam the system, there's also more information out there for them about how to do it, right? So I think that is a little bit on the rise as well. So it's just that much more important to protect yourself and to be able to, look closely at each case and assess it for red flags and risks and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The good news is that those still don't happen nearly as much as people think. You hear numbers kicked around that fall throughs happen, a third of the time, and that feels very high to me. I think that includes all kinds of situations, people meeting each other online, people working with disreputable sources. I would say with the placing entities that I work with, it's probably closer to maybe that 10 or 15% number. There are no hard statistics on it.
Right.
So it certainly does happen, and it's a risk of adoption, but it doesn't happen as much as people think that it does.
Yeah, that's one of the scary things, I think, when you're heading into the adoption process is, what if that happens? We get into it and we're on the hook financially, we're on the hook emotionally, and then the rug kind of gets pulled out from under us, and there's no way to really prepare for that. It's just a hard
and I think
fact.
That is adoptive parents' biggest fear, and rightly so.
We can get into that a little bit later. Let's jump into a few other things real quick about the fewer placements. And I know a lot of people have asked about what statistics, how many placements do we have every year? And it's so hard because nobody really tracks the number of placements every year. If we'd have to go to every county or every agency, every attorney, and then even miss some of the independent ones, like you're talking about. People just meet each other. So how do we even know there are fewer placements?
Well, I think, certainly with international, we know, right? Because that you can look at, how many visas are being given to the babies or the children. So that has certainly dropped. And even if without looking at those numbers, it's just obvious because so many of the large, robust programs have closed. Russia's closed, Guatemala's closed, Vietnam is closed. Vietnam's open to a very few placements right now. China has such a much longer wait time than they used to because they're doing so many fewer placements. So international adoption has certainly dropped. And so then you have a lot of those families who otherwise would have pursued international looking to pursue domestic adoption. So even if the domestic numbers were the same, you would still have more hopeful adoptive parents kind of looking, to adopt those babies. But, I think just, even without having the hard statistics, just knowing that, it is easier for expectant moms to terminate a pregnancy. There's certainly much more societal support and less of a stigma for single motherhood, than there used to be. So those options are out there as well. So I think all of that has really come together to lead to fewer placements and for more adoptive families looking for those placements.
Yeah, that's true. There are some organizations that over the years have done some surveying and those kind of things just to try to get a grasp of how many placements there really are and what kind of placements there are, how many infants, how many of different races and those kinds of things. So we do have data, just nothing really conclusive because nobody tracks it all, which would be very difficult to do in how we handle our adoptions in this country. But I think we can agree that, and for the most part, there are fewer placements than even just a few years ago.
Right.
Let's talk about, you mentioned the pros and cons of having an online presence for your adoption. And you mentioned a little bit about what that means for a birth mom being able to have some access to the internet and have some more information. But what about the Hope Adopted families?
Yeah, I think pretty much these days, anytime when anybody has an unanswered question, right, the first thing you do is go online to look for the answer. So, I think expectant moms are no different. And if they're starting to consider the idea of adoption, that's often going to be the first place where they go for information. But you're right, it really is very much of a double-edged sword because, again, you have the very honest, reputable people who are looking there for information. But it's also, if you're looking for a potential match online, you're opening yourself up to so many disreputable people and people who are out there looking to scam the system. And, somebody on the other end of the computer may not even be pregnant or may not even be female,
Yeah, really.
Whereas somebody who goes and sits across the desk from somebody, an adoption agency, you have to be a little bit more on the up and up. So it is a double-edged sword, but I think there is a way to kind of get the benefit of that and manage the risk. And that's really, and certainly there are direct matches and success stories of people who meet each other directly online all the time. But again, it opens you up to the risk. So by working with agencies and attorneys that are taking advantage of those online opportunities, whether they are doing outreach for their agency or attorney generally to expectant moms, or whether they are kind of posting some people's profiles without their direct contact information and doing some outreach that way, you can get the benefit of that presence, but still having the potential birth moms go through those entities, and having the agencies and the attorneys doing all that vetting before any match is ever made, I think kind of gives you the pros without the cons.
Yeah, that's true. And I think some people, at least that I've talked to, they want that, but they know the higher cost kind of comes with that. So it's kind of weighing of, okay, I can't really afford a $40,000 adoption, but I could just take the risk of doing an independent adoption and finding my own match. But the risk goes, like you said, way up there. So for hopefully adopted families, it's really hard.
Not just the emotional risk, but also the financial risk. So every situation is going to be different in terms of that cost and what you're looking at. But if you do, you could potentially lose more money in a case like that, than going through an agency or attorney. So those are all different aspects of it to be weighed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a hard one to weigh right there, because
absolutely,
you have to look at your budget, but also your ability to handle doing an independent adoption. So, well, let's talk about what we can do. Well, actually, one thing I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned the risks and you mentioned scams or fraud, or women or possibly men posing as a expectant mother, hoping to get some monetary compensation or something back from hopefully adoptive parents, scamming them out of that,
right?
Playing like they're an expected mother. Do you see that has changed over the last few years, like to try to scam people? Do you think it's increased, or how do you think it's changed?
Well, I do think it has increased a little bit because of, again, all that information online and figuring out how to do it and so on. And tying in with that, I think that the people who do that have become more sophisticated at it. And there are all kinds of groups online that, they share information to try to keep people from falling into these scams, which is great. But at the same time, they're sharing the information with the potential scammers. They can find it too and say, oh, that's how they figured this one out. Let me do it differently next time, So I do think it has increased and has gotten a bit more sophisticated. But I think that brings us back to kind of one of the things of adoption that hasn't changed, which is it's just always so critical to have a reputable, experienced, informed team. And, they are going to know how the scams are becoming more sophisticated. They're going to know what to look for. So they're staying on top of that as well. So having those people on your team who can look at cases, who can spot the red flags is really critical, because somebody who's just kind of brand new to it and puts their name out there on the internet and doesn't realize, how easy it can be to get, say, a false proof of pregnancy or something like that, they're much more easily fooled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more easily targeted. How about the cost of adoption? Do you think that has changed over the last several years? And if so, why?
It has. It continues to creep up, unfortunately. But I think that's just, similar to so many other things in the market. It's because a lot of the attorneys' hourly fees are going up.
Mm-hmm.
It's because the costs of some of the birth moms' different pregnancy-related expenses are going up. I haven't seen any categories that have had, unusual or really significant jumps. I've seen more of just sort of a creeping up,
right.
As we go along.
Do you think in working with attorneys and agencies, the level of services have gone up over the years? Like maybe they are more, some offer, I've seen this in my little world about some agencies, even facilitators have increased the level of service. So like before they would say, okay, we'll help you with a match. And now we're going to be, well, we'll help you with the match, but we're also going to hold your hand through how to make a profile and how to make a video and how to make an online presence and how to share yourself out there on the internet, and maybe even more of a marketing type aspect to their services. Have you seen that increase or change?
I've seen, certainly third parties that offer, different elements of those, and some have different niches, and sometimes agencies partner, with those third parties rather than taking some of that on themselves. Where I think I've seen the biggest difference in what agencies and attorneys' offices in the states where the attorneys are allowed to do these things, which is a wonderful thing, is really much more focus on the services to the expectant moms. Really making sure that they are understanding their role and their rights and their choices in the process, really encouraging them to accept counseling, or if they don't want to go to formal counseling, some of the agencies have, informal birth mom support groups of their own. And then even beyond the placement, more and more places are offering birth moms, lifetime counseling and job training and things like that. And that's, that wasn't always the case. So I think that has been a real positive change in everybody's consciousness about this and what services are really important to make sure that this can be as positive an experience as possible for everyone involved.
Yeah, I really like that. That's so important. And I think it has gotten lost in the past of the birth mom support. Especially post-placement, they're still crisis. They're still struggling, and maybe even worse than before placement. So, I
was going to say, unfortunately, most expectant moms refuse counseling during the pregnancy, and a lot of times, when they realize, boy, I sure could use some help, is after the placement. So, knowing that they can go back to the agency, 1 week, 1 month, 5 years after the placement and say, I could use that help now. It is really great that that's available.
So as hopeful adoptive parents, is that something important we should be asking our agencies or the people that we're working with? How much post-adoption support do you have?
I think so. And I think that there is increased awareness of that as well. And I think that has come along with, adoptions becoming more and more open over time, which is another change. Many of them are still not, fully open, as a lot of people think that they are, oh, I have to be comfortable with that jumping in. But they're certainly more open than they were, a generation ago. And by having the expectant moms and then they become the birth moms, more involved in the process, both before, during, and after, I think has raised everybody's awareness about their role and about the importance to really try to understand what is the other person's experience versus, it used to be more almost a bit more transactional, if you will, with adoptive parents sort of going to an agency, and it was about, I want a baby. I think now it's more about, let's find the right person, let's build a relationship, let's make a good choice here for everybody. And that's been a really great change, and I think probably most of all for the babies.
Absolutely. I know it was a change in us. I mean, we've had 3 adoptions, and when we first started, we were scared of openness because we were just a little bit of our ignorance. We just didn't know what it meant.
Most people are when they start.
Right. Yeah. We just didn't know. And the more we learn and the more we have an actual relationship with our kids as birth parents, and we see what happens with that relationship and how beneficial it can be, not only for us, but more importantly for the children, it's huge. And so I think you're right. I hope that change is continuing to happen as more and more people realize openness in adoption is huge. And openness is different than just open. I think you're right. People get a little misconception there. Open adoption is full disclosure. Everybody knows everything about everybody, and that's not necessarily the case. There are different, varying levels of openness in adoption, and we've done podcasts on that, and we've had definite articles on the blog about that. So
yeah, and I think openness can be as much a mindset as it is, what information is exchanged and what is not exchanged.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big topic to tackle, and I would encourage anybody listening to this, if you're a little bit weary of openness or maybe not understanding what openness is, go look at it on the Infant Adoption Guide blog or podcast or anywhere else on the internet. You'll get some good information about that.
Yeah, that's great because, so many people are scared of that when they start, and I think it turns a lot of people off to adoption. So, it's really important to understand what it is, what it's not. It's not co-parenting.
Yes.
It's not, unannounced visitors on your doorstep, things like that.
That's exactly right, yes. Well, let's get into some tips, like what can we share with hopeful adopted parents about what can help them with dealing with some of these changes, helping them adopt faster, less risk. What kind of tips can you share with us?
Well, in terms of adopting faster, again, I think the underlying basis of that is something that hasn't changed, although the way people go about it may change. And there are basically, I think, kind of 3 pieces that are going to have some of the biggest impact on time. Of course, there are other things as well. But, one is getting yourself out there and getting as much exposure as you can to potential birth moms, whether you are choosing to do your own outreach and or whether you are working with multiple agencies and attorneys. A lot of people who are new to adoption still think, once I'm ready to adopt, I just go sign up with this one agency down the street and then I wait however long they tell me to wait. And you really can be a lot more proactive about that. And there are many places out there that will allow you to sign up with multiple agencies, multiple attorneys, and there are many great reputable places that charge very little in the way of application fees. So it's financially reasonable to do that. You're not looking at spending thousands of dollars with each place that you sign up with. So the more exposure you can have, the more opportunities you're going to have. Then when you have opportunities, having that great profile, whatever format it's going to take, but you have to have a great profile to really communicate who you are, to make that connection with the right birth mom. You're not trying to match with any birth mom. I always tell people you're not trying to sell yourself and convince her to choose you if you're not the right family. But you need to really effectively communicate the type of family you are so that she can make an informed choice and you have that opportunity to really connect with her. So having that great profile is going to help you. And then being as flexible as you can regarding your parameters of the child that you're willing to adopt. Again, the more flexible you are, the more opportunities you're going to have, whether that's flexible in race, in social medical background, in your budget, in what kind of openness you're willing to accept. These are all areas where the more flexible that you are, the more opportunities you'll have. And, I always tell my clients, you shouldn't ever have to go outside of your comfort zone, but what you should do is really do some thinking and some soul-searching and some research about what are the boundaries of that comfort zone. I think all of our initial reactions to almost any decision in life, is you kind of go right into the bullseye, in the center of that comfort zone. But as you learn more, you might realize, oh, hey, I really could be comfortable with X or Y, but no, maybe Z is still off the table. But having those conversations and that introspection to figure out, what really works for me. Again, the more flexible you are, the more opportunities you're going to have, the faster things are going to go.
Yeah, I would say, to add on to that a little bit, in our experience, we've found several families, many families actually, in and around our circle of friends and through our family that have adopted, and maybe they've adopted multiracially, maybe they've adopted from different parts of the country, and maybe they're outside of what we thought maybe our preferences were. Like, hey, well, what, they did it. How was their experience, and what did they think? And that opened our eyes a little more to, oh yeah, that's probably something we can do. So they've done it, and they've kind of shared with us how they've done it and what the pros and cons were, and so that really opened our eyes.
Yeah, and talking to those people, sometimes it may validate that, okay, that's not the path for me, and that's important information too. But
Absolutely.
Other times it might make you think, wow, I never thought about that, but that could work too.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up too, and we've had this discussion on the podcast before, but how do you think it's changed the drug use and abuse going on in the country? It seems like it's on a rise. It feels like it's even more in the adoption world than it has been before, as far as expectant moms having some use and abuse of drugs or alcohol. And as hopeful adoptive parents, we kind of got to gauge our level of comfort with that as well. Okay, the birth mom's had this much exposure or this much use during a pregnancy, and how do you deal with that? Do you think that's changed over the years, the last few years?
It's a little bit. I don't think quite as drastically as a lot of people think or fear, at least, with the places that I work with and kind of what I've seen. Unfortunately, I still see that most birth moms smoke cigarettes, but not to the extent that they used to. So that's gone down, I think, at least in terms of smoking less frequently. So that's good. I still, I don't see a lot of heavy drinkers or really hard drug use, in terms of like, shooting heroin or, needle drugs, things like that. I don't see that hardly at all, which is great. I think what there has been a little bit of an increase in is when it comes to like pain pills, things like that. Right. And as a result of that, expectant moms who are on medically managed methadone or Subutex programs. There are pros and cons. I'm no doctor. I certainly can't give medical advice, but, my understanding is that methadone and Subutex, there are some studies out there that show that they're relatively benign. And then if an expectant mom is in one of those programs, she's getting drug tested regularly. You know exactly what you're dealing with, and it's less of the unknown mystery, which can be better than a case where maybe, you think everything's fine, but you don't really know, what's happening. But that's probably where I've seen the biggest change, again, is when it comes to kind of pain pills and those medical programs affiliated with that. I haven't really seen significant change in other categories.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of come up a few times here and there, especially on our Facebook groups. So I just thought I'd ask that. What other tips? We've covered several so far for hopeful adoptive families that would help them overcome some of these changes or deal with some of these changes that are happening. Any other tips you see, especially as the adoption world continues to change?
Yeah, I think just, again, having that experienced team, because I don't know that it's really reasonable for anybody who doesn't have adoption as their full-time job to be on top of all of these things. It's hard enough for those of us who do have adoption as their full-time job. So I think, working with the reputable, experienced, knowledgeable professionals who are staying on top of all those things as, part of their work, rather than trying to manage all of that yourself. I mean, of course, you want to be as informed and up to date as possible, but I just think there's so much at risk there are so many moving parts that you really want to have a team that you're comfortable with and that you trust.
Yeah, I agree. That's big. I want to ask a little bit of a selfish question here, I guess. Well, it's not. It's sort of selfish. What's near and dear to my heart are adoption profile videos, and we've created some for all of our adoptions, and I think they've just been huge as far as connecting to our kids as birth parents. And so, I've even created a site, adoptionprofilevideo.com, to help people make their own videos. And I just wanted to ask you, I guess, what your experience is with it, what you think about videos and as part of people's profile. Is it becoming bigger? Do you see it as, how effective do you see them?
It depends. To me, it depends on how they're used in terms of what their effectiveness is. Yeah, they're definitely becoming bigger, and I think they will continue to be bigger. But just as, again, to me, so much of it is just similar to the profile, right? You can have really ineffective profiles, and you can have really ineffective videos, and you can have really effective ones on both sides. And I almost see with a lot of videos that are out there online, I don't know if it's a bit of the selfie culture or what it is, but I find that videos, people's immediate inclination, I think they're a little bit more self-focused than I think these days when people kind of sit down and write a profile. They tend to come across a little bit more as, just kind of look at our fabulous life and look at what we're all about, where I think it's so important, if you're going to invest the time and energy to do it, make sure you're really thinking about your audience and what are the things that she wants to know about you and what's going to be important for her in choosing the family that she wants her child to grow up with, just as you do with the profile, and making sure you're communicating, again, what she cares to hear. I think people, like I said, when as soon as that, they turn their phone on themselves, I don't feel like they're sort of as planned out, or a lot of them are as effective. So I think if you're going to do it, again, working with a professional, just, somebody who can help you figure out what are the right messages or what are the important categories to cover so that she has the information she needs about you to make that video be effective. A video just for the sake of having a video isn't going to do anything if it doesn't communicate the information that she's looking for to get answered.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I've seen a lot of bad videos, and I've seen some really good ones. And I think the good ones are the people that are very sincere, that have kind of thought about what they wanted to say. And then also, like you said, it's not just about me. It's more about, this is what life would be like for your child in our family.
Yes.
And I think that's huge.
Because that's the bottom line. That's all she really cares about. Right.
Yeah. And we, as hopeful adoptive parents, kind of overlook that and don't think about it as often. Some people do. I've seen some great videos, and they do a great job of sharing that. And I think they probably get picked faster. But yeah, I just wanted to throw it out there because I think videos are big. A really well-made video is big. And just like you said with the profiles, it is the same. Okay, so I'm wrapping up here. Let's talk about some stories. Do you have any stories you could share about families that you've had that recently successfully adopted, and that you could point us to of why they successfully adopted, or what they did?
Yeah, to mind, two stories, couple couples.
Yeah.
Right? Well, one is a couple, Sarita and Guillermo, and I worked with them a few years ago, back in 2015. We worked together when they adopted their daughter, and they adopted her pretty quickly. They adopted her, and from once they were kind of out there, ready to be presented to expectant moms, they adopted within 4 months, which was wonderful.
Wow. Yeah.
And then so the next year, 2016, they wanted to adopt again, and kind of, tried to do it on their own. And, I think just even in that year, things change a little bit. And, again, if you're not doing adoption every single day, you forget some of the details of how to approach things and so on. And they tried at it for a year and just, weren't having success, weren't getting the opportunities that they wanted and so on. So, they gave me a call and we started working together again. in the fall, and we did our consultation back in November, and they ended up matching in December and adopting in January.
Wow.
So they adopted so it went really quickly the second time too. Again, once they kind of, had things in place and were up to speed on here's how I need to approach it now. So I think that shows kind of how quickly, the adoption world can change a little bit. And again, what a difference that made for them as soon as they got kind of that right network back in place. So that was really great. And I always like working with people who I've worked with before. It's always so fun when they come back. And then the other family that I was thinking of was Kate and Caesar. They're from here in Florida. And I think that just kind of speaks to the story, or what we were talking about is just kind of the flexibility. So I just worked with them recently, and they got out there, had their profile done, ready to be presented in early December, and they got a call middle of January about a baby girl that had already been born 2 days earlier. And so there wasn't a ton of information. She had been drug exposed, but there was enough information where they felt comfortable, and they were willing to take that leap of faith. So they had her in their arms 5 weeks after starting their process. Right?
Whoa.
So, that's not the right situation for everybody, but for them, it was perfect because they had done that thinking ahead of time and saying, what are we going to be open to? What works for us? What doesn't? So when the situation came up, they were ready to move on it.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Wow. So all the families that you work with, all the families you work with, do they always go through multiple adoption agencies and attorneys?
Almost always, yes.
I'm sure that helps because you get the word out all over the country just like that. So I'm sure that's a big thing to do. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we covered a lot, and I appreciate your stories and your tips of how adoption has changed, and it definitely has, and it definitely will in the future. So maybe we'll call you back. Maybe we won't wait 36 episodes for you to get back on.
36 episodes.
But I appreciate you coming back on today. And I'd just like if you could share with the folks how they could contact you and your adoption consultancy.
Yeah, sure. The best way is on the website. It's theadoptionconsultancy.com. Or you can shoot me an email. It's kind of a long email, so it's probably best to use the link right on the website, but they can email me directly at Nicole@theadoptionconsultancy.com, or our office phone number is 813-681-6232.
Very good. And if you just Google Nicole Witt, you'll see a bunch of different things that she's done for all sorts of different articles and newscasts that she's done over the years. So appreciate all of you done. You are a vast resource for many across the country. And I know I've seen you on a lot of TV shows, just doing quick little things about people asking really simple questions about adoption. So you get the word out, and we appreciate all your work in the adoption world.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for having me back on, Tim.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you again, Nicole. We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay. Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye. All right. I love this episode today. So many great tips and stories and advice from Nicole about how adoption has changed over the years. I hope you got a lot out of this interview. I know I did. And to learn more and to get help on your infant adoption journey, I invite you to go check out Nicole's site, theadoptionconsultancy.com. Give her a call, send her an email. She will definitely help you on your journey. At least figure out where you are, where you want to go, and maybe you want to use her services to help you adopt. But of course, you can find all these links, everything that we talked about in the show today on the show notes at infantadoptionguide.com/53. As we talked about in the interview, I love adoption profile videos. They've worked so well for all three of our adoptions. And I've had a lot of people ask me how to create good video, how to come up with something that will make sense and help reach out to expectant parents. So I've come up with some free video training for you. Just go over to adoptionprofilevideo.com and enter your name and email. And I'm just going to send you 3 free videos that'll help you get you started on creating your own amazing profile video. Not a blah one, not one that will make you look bad, but one that will make you look great, and one that will help reach expectant parents as you go through the infant adoption journey, because that's really what it's about. You need to reach those families, those parents, those mothers who are looking to make an adoption plan. And that's how you can do it effectively through an amazing adoption profile video. So I hope you go do that. And you can go over also to infantadoptionguide.com/welcome, where you can get 4 free adoption books. Get on my website and check those out. If you just enter your name and email, I will send you those ebooks, help you save time, money, and stress, and really help you on your adoption journey as we go. And I hope to see you there. And thanks again for listening. Until next time, you are in my prayers as you go through the adoption journey to build your family. God bless you.
Thanks for listening to my dad.